The sun was still too high in the sky, and Raven's wing would be easily tracking them. He needed to add as many miles as he could between himself and his brother, and as soon as was possible. With ease, he lifted her into his arms and carried her to the base of a nearby tree. There was plenty of thick foliage to protect her from the noonday sun. By the time the men from the wagon train raced over the ridge, it was all over. Seamus lay against the tree trunk. He was alive, but only just. The soft whimpers of the children hidden in the bottom of the wagon could be heard. Everybody else was dead. White Storm rode like the wind, placing as many miles as he could between his brother and the carnage they'd left behind. Most of all, he put as much distance as he could between himself and his half-brother, Raven's wing. They came upon a small stream, but instead of crossing it, he turned and followed the flowing water upstream toward its source. He knew he had to find some snakeweed, and quickly. It was the best cure against the rattlesnake juice his brother's arrow had been soaked in. A short time later, the small plant, complete with root, was in his possession. Within seconds, he was back onto his horses and heading for higher ground. The girl was still alive, but her breathing was becoming labored. Steadily, he climbed higher against the flow of water, which began to deepen and slow their progress. Regardless, he pushed on relentlessly, only stopping infrequently to listen for the slightest of sounds which would warn them they were being followed. When he finally found a small clearing, which would afford them a little shelter, he laid the girl on his blanket and hastily set to work crushing the small plant. He knew he had to extract the plant's juices before he could add the salt to mix it into a thick paste. He used his knife to cut away her shirt, to expose her wound and the arrow, which still protruded from it. He stared at the long, twisted fibers, and his heart sank. He knew only a miracle would save the woman's life now. He also knew it didn't matter how the arrow was withdrawn. The small spear-like spikes would be embedded in her skin and would be extremely hard to remove. His fingers reached out and lifted the limp, sagging arrow. He had to try and keep the fibers together as he extracted the green stick. All he had to do was figure out a way to achieve that goal. His mind raced back to the day, many years ago, to the time when his sister Crystal began her weaving lessons in the women's teepee. She was in great despair that she would ever learn how to twist the woolen fiber fine enough to weave her wedding blanket for her trousseau. With that thought in mind, he began to turn the shaft like the rope. The loose spikes drew back together to form the shaft. He rolled it a second time and began to slowly pull the arrow out. It was a gradual process, but finally the arrow shaft broke free. He covered the wound with the tacky thick paste before resting her back onto the blanket to begin the long wait. With reverence, his hand raised and brushed the loose strands of hair from her face. Her pallor was pale, and she hadn't regained consciousness. Her beauty captured his heart, stealing the air from his lungs as he tenderly looked down at her delicate features. She was even more breathtaking than the first moment he'd seen her, with her face stern with grim determination as she'd pulled the arrow free from her thigh. His eyes traveled down her slender form, taking note of her bound breasts and slender waist. Her hips were rounded while her legs were long and well honed from years in the saddle. The bandage at her thigh was new and clean. The wound itself was closed and healing well. She was only small in stature and so slight, he was amazed that she could handle the animal she rode. His perusal of her person continued as he saw the tight bandage which encircled her chest, a deliberate attempt to hide her breasts and the fact she was female. He quickly dealt with the offending bandage and was pleased with the bountiful breasts which had burst free. Lifting her hands, he found no rings, so she wasn't married, nor were there any obvious signs she'd removed any such band recently. She appeared to be of marriageable age. Turning restlessly in her sleep, she whimpered softly. The rattler's juice was beginning to take its toll. He could only pray the snakeweed was strong enough to draw the poison from her body before it was too late. Food. They would need food before day's end.